Hi, I'm Andrew Strome, and welcome to a continuation of our series on adhesives for the woodworker. And today we're going to be talking about epoxies. Now, epoxies have been around for a really long time, about 90 years. And in that time, they've pretty much revolutionized how people design and make things. They're a tremendously versatile family of adhesives. They can bond a wide range of porous and non-porous materials, not just wood, but glass, metal, and so on, to themselves and to each other. So epoxy isn't versatile just in terms of the range of materials that it can adhere to, but it can also be used for a wide variety of applications. Everything from a surface finish, something, for example, like a cedar strip canoe, to a consolidant, to something like a casting resin. Now, the application for a particular kind of epoxy is usually related to two key factors. One's the viscosity or the consistency, and the other is the cure time. Let's talk about viscosity first. So epoxies range in viscosity from semi-solids, like this putty, which is a product for quick repairs, to, this is a paste for filling in damaged wood. And so they range from these semi-solid forms all the way through to sort of the consistency of, something like, mayonnaise or toothpaste, all the way through to having the consistency of water, very liquid. So this is a casting resin, and of course something like this for this particular application, you want to be able to pour it and for it to flow out evenly. There are also thin epoxies called consolidants, and again these are about the consistency of water, and you brush these onto rotted or damaged wood, and the idea is that it soaks in, hardens, and adds structure to that damaged piece. The other important consideration when working with epoxies is the cure time. Some epoxies cure in a matter of minutes, so-called 5-minute epoxies as an example, which cure for 3 to 7 minutes depending on the temperature and humidity, to epoxies which take several hours to cure, something like a casting resin as an example, where you want it to level out and flow into all those various nooks and crannies before it sets up. So all epoxies consist of two main components, a resin and a hardener. And these two components are inert on their own, but when they're mixed, that starts the curing process. We won't get into the chemistry too much, but how the curing takes place just at a sort of very high level is the molecules start to connect to each other and form long chains. And then these chains in turn start to what's called cross-link. Sort of if you think of a fish net, that's a good analogy. And then if you think of several layers of fish nets superimposed on each other and connected with really strong bonds, that's a good way of visualizing what happens when epoxies cure, sort of at a molecular level. And you can imagine that that resulting matrix is incredibly strong, which is what makes epoxies so resistant to moisture and chemicals and abrasion. From a woodworker's perspective, one of the most useful characteristics of epoxy is that you can modify it without affecting its strength or its cure time. You can thicken epoxies, only thicken them, you can't go the other way, but you can thicken epoxies to improve their gap-filling qualities or prevent them from slumping as they're curing. And you can do this a few ways. One is that there are some specialty fillers available for that, or you can add things like silica or glass fiber to the mixture in order to increase their strength. But a simple way of, if you just need a thicker consistency, a simple way of accomplishing that is to take some sanding dust from your sander and add it into the mix. And of course, if it happens to be dust from the wood that you're working on, then it cures to being a closer match to the project that you happen to have on the go. The other way of modifying epoxies is to add color. And there are lots of ways of doing this. You can use special epoxy tints. If you need a sort of a brown color to match wood that you're working on, say you're filling a knot or something like that, then some things around the kitchen will work just fine. Coffee grounds. I've also used unsweetened cocoa. Those work quite well for that purpose. You can also use things like universal tints or earth pigments for coloring epoxy. There are some watch-outs when working with it. Certainly the mix ratio is critical. You usually only have about 10% latitude in terms of the ratio between resin and hardener. And so it's always a good practice to measure those out as accurately as you can. The second watch-out is to ensure that both components are incorporated fully. So if you're mixing in a cup, it's important to scrape the sides so that any unmixed resin or hardener is fully incorporated. I've had it happen where I thought I've mixed thoroughly but didn't scrape the sides, and it's taken the epoxy or parts of the epoxy pour longer to cure than others. I got an uneven cure because of that. And then the third watch out is, although you have to stir thoroughly, it's important to not stir too vigorously and incorporate air into the mixture. And the reason for this is mostly aesthetic. So if you're doing a pour with a casting resin, if you have air bubbles in it and your pour is translucent or transparent, you'll actually see the bubbles. And then of course, if the bubbles happen to be at the surface or you sand down to them when you're sanding the project after the pour has dried, Murphy's Law says that those bubbles will be at the surface and you'll wind up with pinholes that you'll have to go back and refill. So there is a lot of work being done these days with tinted epoxies. So here we've got a cutting board or a serving tray. This is just a sort of what's known as a river pour these days. We have a small coaster done the same way, and these are epoxies mixed up with a tint and also some metallic powder to give it a little bit of contrast and visual interest. We have two pens that have been actually cast from epoxy. There are a couple of colors here. There's a purple and white and a red and white. And so these are sort of all the rage these days. But one thing to share is there's another way of working with tinted epoxies that doesn't get talked about a lot. And this is just a brief taste of what you can do. Obviously, someone with more creativity and artistic flair could come up with more. But it's a simple matter of incising some geometric lines, some patterns into a piece of wood. I did this with a V-tool, a parting tool. If you wanted to use a router and a jig to approximate wooden stringing, you could do that. But all I did was incise those lines, fill them with epoxy, scrape them down, and sand them flush. And you can see how you could do borders, or you could do lettering or somebody's initials, just again as a way of adding another decorative element to a piece. When working with epoxies, it's really important to keep safety in mind. The chemicals involved are a little hazardous to deal with, and so they need to be treated with some respect. I always wear vinyl gloves, so those chemicals are a skin sensitizer, and you can develop a rash after multiple exposures. It's important to wear glasses to protect against splashes. And if I'm mixing a large amount of epoxy, I always wear an organic vapor respirator. So when you're working with epoxies, even a small amount, it's important to work in a room that's a good size and has adequate ventilation. So I'm going to give you a brief demonstration of mixing up some casting resin to illustrate some of the principles we've been talking about. PPE and good working practices, measuring carefully while mixing, stirring thoroughly but not agitating the mix too much, and of course adding some color to it. So I've got a silicone mold in front of me, and we can pretend that I'm casting material for a bunch of pen blanks. I need 300 milliliters of mixed epoxy. This particular resin uses 2 parts resin to 1 part hardener, so I'm going to measure out 200 milliliters of one and 100 milliliters of the other. But first, put on my respirator and my glasses. There you have it, a quick introduction and overview to working with epoxies. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.